The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters. Welcome back to the Personal Safety Show. I have Yale Wolk here from Erison Property Inspection, and we're going to be talking about home safety. Yale, thank you for coming today.
My pleasure to be here.
Can you tell everyone your origin story? How did you become involved in home inspections? What's your background, and what do you do today?
Well, initially my father owned a hardware store, and I worked, of course, with father in the hardware store, learned about paints and hardware, and talked to contractors on an occasional basis to find out what they did and how they did it. I went off and did a career in another area. I was a hospital administrator for 24 years and left that business, went into business consulting. And because I apparently was doing a good enough job, I was never home. I was going from client to client. The last year I did that, I was home a day and a half, 6 times all year. That's not a good balance of family life. So I left that, trying to figure out what I want to do next. My father had evolved from the hardware store into construction, and contractors at that time were evolving into home inspectors. If you had a good contractor, you called them in. They wanted to ask the contractor what their house was like they were going to buy. And my father in the early to mid-90s found that he was doing more home inspecting than he was actual contract. When I was sitting around having a barbecue with him, talked about it, he says, well, why don't you come out with me and just see what I do, and maybe it's the idea that you get there. I did, got the bug, really enjoyed it. Went off and partnered with my father for a few years, then I went off on my own. And then as my father started to age, my mother and wife knocked our heads together and said, you got to work together. I started doing that and got interested more into that. And as my father faded away into just doing the lead and mold and radon inspections, I picked up more and more of the home inspections and have been doing it since 1998. Now it's about 25 years later. I enjoy helping people. As a hospital CEO, I was helping people with their health issues. I was trying to provide as good a care that community could get with the facility I had. As a business consultant, I was helping businesses turn their businesses around, thrive, and do a better job in what they're doing, and of course be more successful. Now, as a home inspector, I like to help people find out what's really going on in that home. I'm not there to scare them. I'm there to help them provide as much information as I possibly can so that they can make a more intelligent decision when buying that home. We talk about safety issues. We talk about what's good in the home. We talk about what we can do to prevent the home from becoming dangerous or becoming a problem before it actually does become a problem. If I see a water heater that's aged but still working fine, I'll explain to them that it's still working fine, but it's getting on in age. They might want to start budgeting for a new one before it goes out. But when it comes to safety in the home, I also like to point out things like throw rugs that are not secured. I am one of the few inspectors that actually tests microwaves for microwave leakage. I'm finding anywhere from 3 to 4% of the microwave actually radiate out. And if you look into the microwave on a continuous basis, see how your food is being prepared, it's actually cooking your lens and you'll end up with cataracts. That's some of my healthcare background being brought into the home. If I look at a furnace and I start to see a little bit of a reddish tinge, that tells me that they have a cracked heat exchanger and they're getting carbon monoxide in the home. Recently, I inspected a home that the dryer vent was disconnected at the connection going out of the home. The buyer looked at that and says, well, is that a problem? I said, well, a gas dryer exudes carbon monoxide, and this is not connected, and you're putting carbon monoxide into the home. Unfortunately, that buyer turned to me and says, well, how about if I just use it once or twice? Well, no, it should never be used until it's fixed. That's a dangerous thing. I have found dryers clog where I've tested and it doesn't really heat up well. My detector picks up carbon monoxide coming back out of the dryer because the vent is clogged, and it's a simple thing to get your dryer and your vent clean. By the way, one of the key elements of starting home fires is a clogged dryer vent, where the vent heats up, the lint gets hot, and actually starts to fire, and then you have a home fire and it destroyed the dryer.
I'm very interested in your background. Where was your father's hardware store?
It was in Chicago at Diversity and Laramie. He was down there for, I would say, roughly about 20 years. It was the friendly neighborhood
Hardware guy.
store.
Yeah. Where was the hospital that you were an administrator?
Well, there's several, but the primary ones, down in Ottawa, Illinois by Starved Rock, and one in Chicago by Broadway and Irving Park into Broadway. Thoric Hospital Medical Center. Both those hospitals were in severe financial trouble when I took over. The one down in Ottawa actually did not have any cash in the bank, and the administrator that I replaced was trading items for items. He would have a large order of linen coming in, but didn't have any money to buy the oxygen. So he'd trade the oxygen company for the oxygen, would give him some linen. And that's what I took over. I was all of 28 years old. So I decided, well, I couldn't be any worse than it was. And that hospital is still there today. Going back, we were one of the first hospitals to provide a mental health facility in a rural area or semi-rural area. We were the first rural hospital to provide a substance abuse program. And these were considered far in advance of what you were getting in rural areas compared to with Chicago. In fact, our surgical suites were so far advanced that most hospitals in Chicago didn't have them yet. But we turned that around within a year, so we were more stable and still there today. Thoric Hospital had about 6 weeks worth of cash left before they'd be insolvent, and we were turning around. It's still there today.
Since we're talking about safety, can you tell us about some minor and major safety violations that you find in homes?
So when I checked the attic and I found ports cracked or wrapped up in duct tape to keep it together, I have found missing supports in the attic, where you could tell on this when you look outside that the roof looked like it had a little sag, and you go inside and the joists were missing. Another safety issue I find is as wall-to-wall carpeting starts to wear, you start to get some stretch marks in it. You start to get lumps and rolls in it. And that's a nice trip hazard. Outside, sidewalks tend to settle. If they settle too low, that first step onto your landing in the front becomes a higher than normal step. It becomes a trip hazard. Houses can become very nice and quaint and warm, but they can also be the most dangerous place you can be. I know of some places where the smoke detectors, battery compartment is open because it was making too many beeps and the owner took out the battery. Didn't replace it, so the house had no fire alarm in it. The state of Illinois does require a carbon monoxide detector within 15 feet of all sleeping areas. That is for any house that has any type of natural gas coming into the home. The new gas valves are much better than the older ones. The older ones were the brass type, and they tended to leak over time. And I would say 1 out of every 10 homes I would inspect had a gas leak in one of the lines. One of my buyers said, when I found a gas leak in the line going into the furnace, they said, well, is it a bad leak? Well, I've never found a good leak. Those are some of the problems I find. There are structural issues. I've been down in basements where I've seen the supports for the center beam that holds up the center part of the house. They're at an angle. They're actually leaning, indicating a problem with that structure. If you have a brick home and you start to see stair-step cracking, your foundation is starting to settle in an uneven manner. And no, it doesn't get better over time. And if you patch it, it doesn't get any better. Uneven sidewalks. A section is higher than another section. Driveways that have cracks in them can be a trip hazard, as well as not being very sightly.
Can you talk about mold and radon?
Sure.
Those are big, scary words.
The two of them tend to fluctuate in people's minds. At one time in the early 2000s, radon was the big thing. Now we have radon everywhere. Radon is odorless, colorless, and tasteless. It is radioactive because it's a decay of uranium down deep in the ground. When it decays, it forms a gas that comes up through the strata to the surface. We have radon outside and inside. But as homes have become more energy efficient, we're holding more of the air inside. We don't have the drafts we used to have in homes built in the 30s, 40s, 50s that used to have anywhere from 4 to 6 air changes an hour. Homes right now maybe have 1 to 2 air changes an hour because of the insulation we put in and try to save energy. So that builds up the radon inside. Now, if you have 4.0 picocuries per liter of air, that's when the EPA and CDC say you should remediate that air, mitigate it out of the house. There are various mitigation systems that you can install. They run somewhere between $1,200 to $1,600 for the standard installation. It will get the levels down. They won't go to zero, but they'll get it down to hopefully 2.0 picocuries or less. At 4.0, when that mitigation is recommended, it's like getting 200 x-rays a year, chest x-rays a year, or smoking 8 cigarettes a day. even if you don't smoke. That's why it's the second leading cause of cancer in the United States behind smoking. Now, mold, everybody's concerned about now. That took the place of major concern from radon. Mold grows because you bring in, or it comes in, the pollen and the spores from the outside plants come into the house. If they find a moist, not very aerated area, not a lot of air movement, so they have a surface to grow on, that's when you get mold. That's why you see it a lot in the attics or in the basements around various water pipes, or in the attic because you don't have enough insulation. Or a more common thing is whoever built the home didn't vent the bathrooms to the outside, and as a result, you're blowing moist, warm air into the attic, and that helps mold grow. I just did a mold inspection not too long ago where the inspector, I was not the inspector on the property, I was called in for the mold inspection. He had pointed out a single spot of what looked like mold in the attic. It was a little small spot. I was asked to come in and do an inspection, take a sample, see what it was. I looked up in the attic, and yeah, there was a small spot. But he failed to point out the big darkened areas in the rest of the attic where mold was likely growing. The attic had, I would say, a third of it was in black of some kind. And the bathrooms were vented to the roof vents. And that's not very good because wind blows, and it blows that moist air back into the attic. So as a result, we didn't do any testing. He just went right to the mitigation of the mold in the attic. Did an asbestos inspection. Doctor found the occupant had spots on their lungs. I did air sampling and looked for asbestos. And we found that the vinyl flooring is an asbestos vinyl floor, and it had cracked. And at one point, there was a leak in the basement, and it had come up, and they had taken it out, and they scraped it. But every time they scrape it, they're scraping part of that vinyl flooring as well as the mastic that holds it down. And that has some asbestos in it, maybe anywhere from 3 to 5%. But all those little fibers get into the air and they float around. I found a certain level of asbestos fiber in the air that I told him that was there, gave him several recommendations on how to abate it. I've done other inspections for asbestos. Didn't find it in normal places such as insulation around pipes or insulation around air ducts. What they did find was the caulking that was used in the garage windows and door frames had asbestos in it. Not much, and pretty solid. So that really, to my mind, was not an issue because most people don't see the caulking flaking off and putting the fibers in the air. It's pretty much encapsulated in that sticky stuff they make caulking out of. Now, lead is another issue that I see, and I do a fair amount of inspections for a window company. If they do replace windows that are built in 78 or before, they're required to do a lead test around their wood frames. That is a problem, particularly if it's flaking and you have children. That's lead exposure, and that causes some brain damage. If you have young children, by the way, and you have Venetian blinds that were made in China, those Chinese use lead paint on the Venetian blinds. So if your child decides to suck or bite on the Venetian blind while they're looking out the window, they may have a problem with some lead ingestion. But I do that inspection and tell them whether there's a lead content in the window frames or not, and then they move from there. If it is, they have to use special mitigation process, a hazardous waste process.
What's the worst condition inspection you ever did? I'm sure there's one or two that just stand out in your memory.
There's more than one or two for different conditions. One is, I came to the house, I was doing the inspection, I detected a little bit of an odor in the home, and I wasn't sure exactly what it was. And when I went to go downstairs to start checking the mechanicals, the foundation, the realtor turns to me and says, "You may not want to go down there." And I said, "Well, I've got to. That's where that stuff is." He says, "Well, if you go down, make sure you watch where you step." The owner had 2 dogs, and that was their dog run, and they didn't clean it up. That's an issue. Luckily, it was concrete flooring and not carpeting, so the cleanup was a little bit easier than if you had to pull out all that carpeting. And I've gone into attics, and I've actually seen the mold up there. It had grown so far, it was starting to look kind of, I wouldn't say flaky, it had an iridescent look to it. Now, when it starts getting that far and it starts to look furry, now we're talking about hazardous mold. And I saw that, I left it quickly, and I put my mask on that has 2 filters on it, went back in. Those are 2. The gas leaks was more common than it is today, but I walked in the house and it was just full of gas. You could smell it. First thing we did is open the windows, turn off the furnace, aired it out, and then proceeded with it and found that most of the valves downstairs from the water heater and the furnace actually were leaking natural gas. There was another one. The worst case I saw was an investor that was looking at a home and said, now don't get too worried about it. I'm just looking at the structure of the home and don't worry about the inside. And I went in and the walls and the ceiling had all collapsed. And I asked, what happened? And they said, well, the home is being foreclosed. The owners were so upset that they were losing the home. They put a plug in the bathtub on the second floor, turned on the water, left, locked the door, and walked away. And there was nothing but water damage throughout. So I looked for the structure issues. We checked for mold to see if there was any. There was. And that was probably the most destructive one I've seen.
When someone purchases a home and an inspector finds an issue, how does that issue get resolved? Is it the buyer? Is it the seller? Are you involved in any of that?
No, I'm not involved in that. I'm involved in providing the information to the buyer of what I find. And then it's the buyer, if they have a concern with those issues or an issue, they go to their realtor and their attorney who talks to the seller's attorney who talks to the seller and decide whether they will do an adjustment to the price or have it fixed and have evidence of that fix. If I find something that the realtor says, well, the buyer is going to take care, or the seller is going to take care of that, my suggestion to the buyer is see the receipt. If they took care of it, look at the receipt, make sure that it was taken care of to your satisfaction, and then make sure that everything is fine. I have been told several times that the roof is a new roof or a recent roof. And I send up my drone. I stopped walking roofs a few years ago because two inspectors died walking the roof. One of them went through the roof on a weak spot, went through the attic, and landed on the second floor in the home. He died, obviously, and the homeowner sued the inspector and his company for damage to the home. The other one was walking a roof and had loose shingles. The shingles slipped. He landed on the concrete driveway. Again, the owner sued them for damage to the roof, even though the shingles were loose. So I use a drone. I fly my drone over, and also that not only helps me see what's on the roof, but once I have those pictures on the computer, I'm able to enlarge it and take a close look at the shingles, take a look at the roof. A lot of times I'm told, like I say, the roof was new or is recently replaced, and I'll look at my drone pictures and find out that there's missing shingles, there's parts missing, there's a sag in the roof. So as a result, that's what I inform my buyer, and then they can negotiate whatever they want to negotiate. Once I'm done, it's up to my client to decide what they want to do with that information.
So your client is always the buyer?
Not always. Sometimes I have people who want to know what's going on in their home prior to putting it on the market, want to take care of it. As a result, I'll do a pre-listing inspection. Do the same inspection, but the owner of the home now has the report, now can take care of whatever has to be taken care of, particularly the major items, and put that house on for maybe a little more money because the things are taken care of. Unfortunately, last year, over half of the homes that were purchased did not have an inspection. A lot of those people are regretting saving that money on the inspection, only to find out it's costing them thousands of dollars to take care of whatever happened to be wrong in the home. I've had a person who purchased a condo for about $300,000 range and found out he had to put in between $50,000 and $100,000 in repairs because of the electrical issues or the plumbing issues. In this case, it was both. So as a result, they saved on the inspection. Their offer was the best that it looked like, and it's now costing them a lot of money because of that.
What happens if an inspector misses something? Is there recourse for the buyer afterwards? Should they go back to the seller? Do they go to the inspector? What's that process like?
Well, that's why we carry E&O insurance, errors and omissions. Everybody's human, and there's going to be times when you may miss something. If it is a major thing and they come back to the inspector and say, why did you miss it? And it's a legitimate miss, not one that was made up or something that was difficult to see, then we have insurance to cover those kind of items. I'll give you an example of what difficult to see. I did a tri-level a few years ago. The young gentleman was purchasing it first home with his newly married wife. The father was a contractor. I did the inspection, and I got a call about a week later saying, why didn't I tell them there was no insulation on the lower level attic? I said there was no access to that attic. When I went out to that home, I saw where he cut a hole in the wall to look, and then they found no insulation. Well, the inspector's not going to cut holes in the wall to look. Anything we touch or we do, we're liable for if it causes damage. So we're not going to cut holes in walls. His comment back was, well, you have insurance. Why don't we just take care of the kid? No, I wasn't going to do that. What I did do in that particular case, I gave him a partial refund on the inspection. I said, good luck, and that was it. There's those cases. There's others that in 25 years of doing this inspecting, I've maybe had 5 or 6 cases where I've been called back because they said I missed something. And in 1 or 2 cases, as I recall, I actually missed it. And that was early in my career when I could have missed it.
Yeah, how do you get clients?
Most of my clients come referrals from realtors. I do get a small amount from the internet to find me there. They call and we talk. And I get a small amount from past clients who are now buying another home. You don't buy a home normally every year. So I'm seeing some clients coming back that have purchased a home 5, 6, 8 years ago. That's first question is, are you still doing inspections? And then go on from there. I do get a small amount from real estate attorneys and mortgage brokers. But the primary source right now are realtor referrals.
How much can someone expect to pay for an inspection, a radon test, whatever other tests are needed when someone's purchasing a home?
The first thing you need to find out is how long they've been doing inspections. If it's a new person just coming out of training, a lot of them are carpenters. They know the carpentry. They don't know a whole lot about electrical or plumbing, and they know something about structure, framing, and drywalling. As a result, you're going to get a little bit less of a thorough inspection. Some of the new guys are told all they have to do is the state minimum, which is about 45 minutes, and there's a list of things they have to cover, and that's it. They'll charge somewhere in the low to mid $300 range. Now, the person with more experience and has a better track record, the price will go up. I charge on a standard 3 or 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. We'll run somewhere in the $450 to $475 range. Radon tests will vary again, anywhere from one that's just getting into the business for about $180 to $200 to those who have been in the business for a while and have a lot of units that they have to buy and have tested every year. Those people are going to charge somewhere around $250 to $300 for an inspection. Now, in radon testing, there are different ways of testing, and the prices will vary depending on it. We use an electronic sniffer that actually checks the air every 15 minutes for 48 hours and then gives an average level in that 48 hours, assuming that the client does not open windows or leave doors open. Leaving doors open and leaving windows open during a radon inspection will actually increase the level because you're causing a draft, and your homes have a very slight positive pressure to it. When you eliminate that slight positive pressure, it allows more radon to get in the home. I don't feel like shortcutting our clients. So as a result, we use the best that's available and keep it as current as possible, complying with all the state and federal radiation and testing procedures. Mold will, again, depends on what I'm doing. If I'm doing swab testing, just to tell you what kind of mold it is, that's much less expensive. That's in the low $100 range compared to if I have to do an air test. I have to sample the inside air as well as the outside air. Why the outside? Because that's my control. What you have in pollen and spores on the outside should be close to what you have on the inside. If you have more on the inside, and particularly of certain types, as compared to the outside, then you have a mold issue, and it's floating through the air. We can see where we can try to find out where it's from, but that tells you what you're breathing. The cost of that is going to be in the mid to upper range of the $200 range.
Yale, thank you very much. Can you tell our listeners, whether they're a homeowner, a real estate agent, someone in the real estate business, how they can get a hold of you if they would like to ask you questions, hire you? How can people reach out to you?
Well, the easiest way to reach out to me is my telephone number. Just a telephone call takes a lot less energy and a lot less time. My phone number is 847-477-3565. And if you have a question, we don't charge for consultation on the telephone. So if you have a question about your home, or if you have a concern about something you're buying, I can talk to them on the phone. You can text me at that telephone number also. My email address is ywolk361@gmail.com. My website is Erison Property Inspection. That's ErisonPropertyInspection@gmail.com. You get hold of me any which way, as I say, phone, text, email, and we'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can. The only exception is if I'm doing an inspection, I do not take a time away from that inspection to answer phone calls and take any time. I will answer it and ask if I can get back to you at that particular number. Otherwise, anytime between 8 in the morning and 8 in the evening, I take phone calls. I tell people I work half days, 8 in the morning, 8 in the evening.
What final thoughts can you provide to everyone so they can stay safe in their own homes?
Well, my final thoughts are, if you're buying a home, particularly in this type of market we're in today with not enough homes on the market, people making multiple offers, you're not doing yourself a favor by waiving the home inspection, because you could find yourself spending a lot of money on a home that you thought was just in perfect condition. So contact either myself or a competent, experienced home inspector and just ask them some questions or have them come out. It'll save you a lot of money in the future.
All right. Well, thank you for coming out. I greatly appreciate it, and so do our listeners.
Thank you.
To wrap up, Yale gave us his contact information, and I'm going to repeat it here. His name is Yale, Y-A-L-E, Wolk, W-O-L-K. He prefers to be called on the phone, and that number, his direct line, is 847-477-3565. His email address is Y as in young, W as in William, O as in ocean, L as in Lincoln, K as in king, 361@gmail.com. ywolk361@gmail.com. And his website is Erison, E-R-I-S-O-N, propertyinspection.com. As always, if you wanted to reach out to me with any questions, comments, concerns, would like an underwriting spot on the show, please reach out to me at firearmmentorcard.com. Also, my class schedule is listed at firearmmentor.com/classes. Stay safe out there, and pretty soon I'll see you at the shooting range. This is Marcus Melnick with Firearm Mentor, signing off. The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters.